Terra, 4 was a planet renowned across the galaxy for its unique role in galactic diplomacy and cultural exchanges. Its massive floating cities and tranquil landscapes house an intricate web of intergalactic ambassadors and scholars. The purpose of today's event was simple: to introduce young alien students to the food culture of Earth, humanity's home planet. As part of the Intergalactic Cultural Exchange Program, students from various species had gathered in a sleek, holographic auditorium filled with the smell of spices, breads, and fruits from Earth. Their task was to try Earth's food and engage in the most basic of human experiences: eating. Among the students stood Xylo, a tall, slender figure with translucent skin that shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights. His alien species, the Crithians, were known across the galaxy for their advanced intellect, but also for their condescending attitudes toward lesser developed species. In fact, they saw most other life forms as primitive, especially humans. Xylo couldn't hide his disgust as he looked at the display of food on the large, transparent tables. "How crude," he muttered under his breath, surveying piles of tacos, bowls of pasta, and trays of sizzling meats. "This is what they call fine dining." His fellow students chuckled. "I heard the humans' food is largely about surviving," one student from the Andromeda star system said. "I'm sure it's nostalgic." But Xylo wasn't so kind. He had studied Earth, read its historical texts, and sampled its foods during brief interactions in the past. It all seemed beneath him. The thought that a species as young and inexperienced as humanity could rival the galactic powers was laughable, especially when their food was so primitive. The human ambassador in the room, a middle-aged woman with bright eyes named Clara, smiled warmly at the group. "Welcome to the Earth food experience. We hope you enjoy your first meal from our planet." With a gleam of mischief in his eye, Xylo spoke up. "I'm sure the primitive nature of your cuisine will leave a lasting impression. It's been a pleasure to witness your taste in such matters, but I don't expect anything impressive." Clara raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her expression calm. "The challenge. I'll make a deal," Xylo continued with a confident grin. "I'll taste one of your foods, and if I find it even remotely acceptable, I'll admit that humans have something of value. But if it's truly as primitive as it appears, I will declare that Crithian food remains far superior to anything you've ever cooked." The other students exchanged skeptical glances. Xylo's arrogance was known across the galaxy, and now it was clear that he was looking for a reason to further disparage human culture. "Fair enough," Clara replied. "I'll choose something special. This will be a test of your palate." With a wave of her hand, a dish appeared in front of Xylo. It was a deep red bowl filled with a steaming, spicy concoction, human chili. The ingredients were simple: ground beef, beans, tomatoes, peppers, onions, and an assortment of spices, many of which came from Earth's harshest climates. Xylo frowned at the bowl. "What is this? Some kind of mush?" "It's called chili," Clara explained with a smile. "It's one of humanity's oldest dishes, known for its rich flavors and, shall we say, kick." He raised an eyebrow. "It's merely a stew. I expected more refinement." He lifted his spoon and took a large bite, prepared to dismiss it as an unpleasant, insipid experience. The first bite, at first, it was only mildly unpleasant. The taste was robust, yes, but nothing beyond the scope of what he expected from a simple dish. But then the heat hit. Xylo's face flushed as the spice spread across his tongue, down his throat, and into his chest. He could feel it burning, a sensation he had never encountered before. His heart rate increased. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. What was this strange feeling? He tried to ignore it, convinced that it was a momentary discomfort, but the heat only grew stronger, more intense. His throat felt like it was closing, the air becoming thicker with each passing second. The other students watched in silent amusement as Xylo began to panic. He reached for a glass of water, only to find it didn't help. The chili's heat was unlike anything his species had ever encountered. It was like fire itself had entered his body. His vision blurred, and his body temperature skyrocketed. "Are you all right?" one of the students asked, a slight edge of concern in their voice. Xylo staggered, clutching his chest. What is happening to me?" His voice was strained, his body trembling. The more he tried to focus, the more he felt his body rejecting the food. the alien's worst nightmare. In a panic, Xylo pushed away from the table and fell to his knees, gasping for air. His alien physiology, advanced beyond human comprehension, was now fighting against a simple earth ingredient. To his species, chili's heat was perceived as a toxic, even lethal compound. His body's natural defenses went into overdrive, and he collapsed to the floor. Clara rushed over with alarming speed, signaling to the medics who were on standby. "Get the antidote ready," she barked. She knelt beside Xylo, her voice calm despite the chaos unfolding around her. "You're having an allergic reaction. Don't worry, we prepared for this." Within moments, a human medic approached with a small vial of clear liquid. They administered the antidote directly into Xylo's bloodstream. His body, which had been spiraling into anaphylactic shock, began to stabilize. Xylo's mind swirled in confusion as the heat began to fade. His skin, which had been flushed with fiery redness, gradually returned to its natural hue. He gasped for air, his throat now clearing, and his heart rate returning to normal. Revelation of strength. Xylo sat up slowly, still dizzy. "What happened?" he croaked, looking at Claire with wide, bewildered eyes. "You just ate something that was a little too much for your species," Claire explained softly. "Chili peppers contain a compound called capsaicin. It causes a burning sensation in humans, but it's harmless to us. For some species, though, it can trigger a severe allergic reaction. It appears your physiology is particularly sensitive to it." Xylo blinked, his arrogance shattered. I thought humans' food was weak, primitive, but I nearly died from one bite of your stew." Clara gave a wry smile. "It's a good reminder that even the simplest things can pack a punch, Xylo. Our food may seem crude to you, but it's part of our strength. We've survived on this planet for millennia, and we've learned how to endure." Xylo sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation. He had come to Terra for the belief that humanity was nothing more than a young, misguided species. But in that moment, he realized something far more important. Humanity's true strength wasn't in technology or intellect alone. It was in their resilience, their ability to adapt and survive against all odds, even against something as simple as a chili pepper. The lesson learned. As the event ended, Xylo found himself in deep thought. The other students were still laughing, but he wasn't focused on the humor anymore. He had been humbled, forced to confront his own species' arrogance in the face of something so simple and yet so potent. Later, Xylo approached Clara. I owe you an apology," he said. "Behold," Clara said, presenting a steaming bowl of Earth's famous chili, a dish known for its spiciness and hearty flavors. It sat before Xylo like a challenge he couldn't resist. Xylo leaned forward, observing the chili with a mix of confusion and disdain. "You call this food?" he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. The chili was nothing more than a thick, red stew, beef, beans, and chunks of peppers floating like foreign objects in a liquid that looked more like crude concoction than a refined dish. "The simplicity is what makes it a delicacy," Clara said, watching Xylo's reaction closely. "It's been a part of human culture for centuries. Every bite is a mixture of heat, flavors, and stories." Xylo smirked and, to the surprise of the other students, he picked up the spoon with an air of superiority. "I doubt it can live up to the food we consume back home, but I will take your little test." He took a large spoonful, his eyes narrowing as the heat from the chili hit his tongue. It wasn't bad at first, just spicy, like he had expected. But then the burn started to intensify. The heat crawled down his throat like wildfire, spreading throughout his chest and stomach. "Interesting," Xylo murmured, wiping his brow with a slight frown. "I can feel the kick. Primitive, but not as unpleasant as I'd imagined." But then the sensation escalated. A surge of heat rushed through him, and suddenly he felt his throat closing. His chest tightened, and his body temperature soared. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. His eyes widened, the chili's burning heat turning into a searing inferno in his mouth and stomach. "Is something wrong?" one of the Githlorians asked, noticing Xylo's sudden distress. Xylo couldn't speak. His throat was constricted, his body betraying him in ways he had never experienced before. The chili was too much. His hands trembled as he clutched at his throat, feeling as though the very air around him had turned poisonous. Clara's face shifted to concern. "Everyone, step back," she commanded. "Give him space." The other students murmured in confusion as Xylo staggered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "What's happening?" he managed to croak. I feel." "You're having an allergic reaction," Clara said calmly, as if she had dealt with this before. "It's the capsaicin in the chili. It's harmless to most humans, but it's toxic to some species." Xylo's eyes widened as panic surged through him. "Toxic," he gasped. "I thought this was just food." Clara nodded. "It is, for most species, but your body doesn't process the compounds in the same way. For you, it registers as a poison." The panic escalates. Xylo collapsed to his knees, unable to fight the sensation of his body fighting back against the food. Sweat poured down his face, and his vision blurred. He thought he could hear the other students murmuring, but it sounded distant, like it was all happening in a haze. "Help him!" Azirian cried, though the panic was evident in her voice. Clara was already moving, pressing a button on the side of the table. "Don't worry, we're prepared for this." Within seconds, a medic arrived with a small device and a vial of liquid. He quickly administered the antidote to Xylo's bloodstream, a fluid designed to neutralize the effect of capsaicin on alien species. Within moments, Xylo's body began to calm. As the antidote took effect, the burning subsided. Xylo's breath returned to normal, though his head still spun. He looked up at Clara, his eyes wide with disbelief. "That was not what I expected," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I almost died from food." "Food?" Clara smiled, though there was a hint of understanding behind her smile. "It's not just about the food, Xylo. It's about adaptation. Earth is a planet filled with dangers, both big and small. Humans have adapted to thrive in environments that are hostile to other species. That chili may seem like a small thing, but to humanity, it's a symbol of survival and strength." Section 3. The Lesson of Humanity's Resilience. As Xylo regained his composure, he stared at the bowl of chili. A part of him still couldn't believe it. He had almost been bested by something as simple as food. The other students, who had watched his embarrassing collapse, were now silent. Xylo felt the weight of their gazes. Some were concerned, others amused. But there was one thing they all shared, an understanding of just how vulnerable even the strongest of species could be when faced with the unexpected. "Perhaps," Xylo began, his voice still somewhat hoarse, "I was wrong. I've looked down on humanity for so long. I thought your people were too young, too primitive to understand the complexities of survival. But now, I see that the very simplicity of your food represents something far greater." Clara nodded gently. "Humans are often underestimated, but our greatest strength lies in our adaptability, in our ability to persevere even in the harshest conditions. We learn to turn what others might call weaknesses into sources of strength." Xylo was silent for a long moment. His gaze shifted from Clara to the bowl of chili, then back to the group of students. He had always believed that his species, with its intellectual superiority and technological advances, was the pinnacle of civilization. But now, in the face of a simple earth dish, he realized how much humanity had to teach him. Section 4. A New Respect for Humanity. The event ended with laughter and chatter as the students shared their thoughts on the chili and other human foods. Xylo, however, was lost in thought. His arrogance had been shattered by the smallest of challenges. He had nearly succumbed to a dish that, to most humans, was a humble comfort food. Later, after the event, Xylo sought out Clara in the quiet corridors of the diplomatic complex. She was standing near a small table, sipping a cup of warm coffee, her expression thoughtful. "I owe you an apology," Xylo said, his tone far more humble than it had been before. "I underestimated humanity. Not just your food, but your entire culture." Clara smiled, her eyes softening. "It's okay. We're used to being underestimated." Xylo paused and spoke again, with a new sense of respect in his voice. I think I've learned something today. Humans don't just survive. You thrive in ways that no one expected. You don't rely on the complex or the advanced. You find power in the simple things, like chili." Clara nodded. "Sometimes, the most powerful things are the ones we overlook." And with that, Xylo finally understood. Humans, in their simplicity, had a strength that no technology or intellect could match, a strength born of survival, adaptation, and resilience. That was the true power of humanity. Final reflection. As Xylo departed, the lesson of that fiery chili stayed with him. He had come to Terra for thinking he was superior to the humans. He left with newfound respect for them, knowing that their greatest strength wasn't in what they could build, but in what they could endure. Xylo sat in the quiet observation room, staring out at the distant stars. His thoughts were a jumble, still trying to process the events of the day. Never in his life had he been so thoroughly humbled. He had always viewed humanity through the lens of superiority, with a dismissive air toward their primitive food and their unrefined culture. His species, the Crithians, had built their empire on intellect, logic, and advanced technology, always putting themselves at the top of the galactic hierarchy. Humans, to him, had always seemed like a curiosity, an interesting species, perhaps, but ultimately beneath the grandeur of the older civilizations. Yet that day, his world had been shattered by a simple, humble bowl of chili. The burning heat of the peppers had triggered an unexpected allergic reaction in his body, and he had nearly died from something that humans ate without a second thought. He had looked down on their food, their culture, only to be brought to his knees by it. The realization was hard to swallow. For the first time, he had experienced what it meant to be vulnerable, truly vulnerable, in a way that no amount of technology could protect him from. Clara's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but confident, as she entered the room. "You're quiet. You've been staring out that window for over an hour." Xylo turned, his eyes still filled with uncertainty. "I underestimated you, Clara. I was wrong about everything. I thought Crithians were the pinnacle of civilization, but you, humans, have something we don't, something that no amount of technology can replace." Clara smiled gently, as if she had been waiting for him to realize this all along. "It's not about technology, Xylo. We've had to survive with what we've had. When you don't have all the resources, you make do with what's available. And sometimes it's the simple things that make all the difference." Xylo nodded slowly, his thoughts now clearer. That chili, it wasn't just food, was it? Clara sat down beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "No, it wasn't. It's a symbol of how we've adapted, how we've learned to thrive in environments that are often harsh and unforgiving. The capsaicin in those peppers is no accident. It's our way of surviving, of defending ourselves against a harsh world. It's a part of who we are. And yet," Xylo murmured, "it almost killed me." Clara's smile widened. "And that's the lesson, isn't it? Humanity thrives because we learn to overcome even the simplest dangers. We might not have the advanced technology of your people, but we've got something more valuable. We've got a will to survive, a resilience that no amount of intellectual superiority can defeat." Section 2. The Unseen Power of Humanity. Later that evening, Xylo sat alone in the vast dining hall, watching as the other students from various species tried more earth dishes, some laughing and some recoiling at the unfamiliar spices. The room was filled with a hum of conversation, but Xylo's mind was elsewhere. He found himself reconsidering everything he had once believed about humanity. They weren't just surviving. They were thriving in ways that no other species had. It wasn't about having the best technology or the most refined civilization. It was about the ability to endure, to adapt to whatever the universe threw their way. Xylo couldn't stop thinking about that chili. Something so simple, yet so deadly to him. It was as if the dish embodied the essence of humanity itself. Unpredictable, fiery, and capable of taking down even the most advanced of species. It had shown him just how much humanity had learned to endure. A few Crithians had come checking on him, offering polite words of sympathy, but none of them truly understood. How could they? They had never faced a challenge like this. They had never been pushed to the brink by something as basic as food. Xylo's hand brushed against his neck, remembering the tightness, the suffocating feeling that had taken over him when the chili's heat had begun to poison his body. It was a sensation he had never known before. But as he thought about it more, he realized that it wasn't just the chili. It was what the chili represented. Humans had lived through countless challenges, climate disasters, wars, diseases, and yet they still stood strong. They had never given up. They had never succumbed to defeat. and they had done it with very little. This thought struck Xylo like a lightning bolt. Could it be that the secret to humanity's strength lay in their simplicity, in their ability to embrace challenges instead of rely on the comforts of technology? Perhaps this was what had allowed them to survive while other species perished, what had allowed them to grow stronger with each passing generation. Xylo leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had underestimated humanity, and now he saw how dangerous that mistake had been. Humans were not weak. They were, in many ways, stronger than any species in the galaxy. They had the power to thrive without relying on the tools that other civilizations depended on. As the evening wore on, Xylo found himself in deep conversation with other students, some of whom had also experienced the chilly challenge. They spoke of their perceptions of humanity, their growing respect for the species that had been dismissed as primitive for so long. One student, a Xerian named Leora, spoke up. "I never thought that humans could be so resilient. When Xylo collapsed, I thought it was some kind of fluke. But then when I learned about the capsicin, I started to understand. It's like you said, humans don't just survive. They adapt. You turn weaknesses into strengths. Your food, your culture, everything about you is about overcoming the odds." Xylo nodded, his heart heavy with the realization of how wrong he had been. "I was blind," he said quietly. "I thought our civilization was the peak of evolution. But now I see that it's not about who is the most technologically advanced. It's about who can survive. And humanity, in its simplicity, has figured out how to do that better than anyone." Section 3. A New Perspective on Strength. The next day, Xylo found himself standing before the Council of Alien Leaders, his own Crithian peers among them. The council had convened to discuss the findings of the cultural exchange program, and it was time for Xylo to report on what he had learned. He stepped forward, his usual arrogance replaced by a quiet confidence. "Honored members of the council," Xylo began, his voice steady. "I have come to deliver a report on Earth and the human species. And I must admit, my findings are not what I expected." There were murmurs in the room as Xylo continued. "I had assumed that humans were primitive, that their culture was beneath us," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I believe that their food was a reflection of their inferior nature. But what I've learned is that humanity has something more valuable than technological supremacy. They have resilience. They have the ability to survive against the odds, to adapt to any environment, to thrive when others falter." The council members exchanged looks, clearly surprised by Xylo's admission. Xylo sat on the observation deck of the Terra for Embassy, looking out at the glowing blue and purple nebulae in the distance. He wasn't just contemplating the vastness of space, though. His thoughts were occupied with something much closer, something that had taken root deep within him after his experiences with the humans. It had been a few days since the chilly incident. Since then, Xylo had found himself revisiting the same conclusion over and over. Humans weren't what he had thought them to be. They were more. They were a species that, despite lacking the advanced technologies of older civilizations, had learned to thrive in the harshest of conditions. And the more Xylo thought about it, the more he saw how humanity's entire existence was a testament to their resilience, their will to survive. No other species in the galaxy had endured as much as they had. He had learned this firsthand. Of course, the chili, a simple dish from a primitive species, had nearly undone him. That bowl of food had humbled him in a way that no amount of intellectual argument or technological superiority ever could. He heard footsteps behind him, and he turned to see Clara approaching. The human ambassador still wore that warm smile she always had, though now Xylo detected a certain knowing in her gaze. "You seem deep in thought," Clara observed, taking a seat next to him. Xylo chuckled, but there was no mirth in it. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About you, about humanity." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Xylo hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I thought I understood strength, the ability to conquer, the ability to control. But what I learned from you humans is that true strength lies not in domination, but in survival, in adaptability. You may not have the power to control everything around you, but you learn to thrive in even the most hostile environments." Clara smiled, as if the words were nothing new to her. "It's what we do. We find a way to survive, to make do with what we have. Our strength is born necessity, not luxury. Xylo nodded slowly. And yet, I still can't get over how simple everything is. How you have so little compared to other species. But you make it work. Your food, your culture, your technology, it all seems so basic, and yet it's so effective. Clara's eyes softened. You've been thinking about it in the wrong way, Xylo. Humanity doesn't need to be the biggest or the best. We don't have the luxury of sitting back and relying on our superior tech or intellect. We have to live with the world around us, to adapt to it, rather than try and control it. Xylo looked out into the expanse of space again, his mind spinning with new insights. He had once dismissed humanity's food, culture, and ways of life as primitive and inferior. But now he saw that what made humans great wasn't their technology, but their hearts and minds, their will to endure in the face of challenges no one else would dare face. He realized that, in many ways, humanity had more strength in their bones than his own Crithian people. Section 2, A Challenge of New Kind. Later that evening, as Xylo walked the halls of the Terra 4 Embassy, he encountered a group of young alien students discussing their experiences with Earth's cuisine. He overheard snippets of conversation about the chili and how different species had reacted to it. Most of the students had experienced varying degrees of discomfort, but none had been quite as affected as Xylo. Some had found it spicy but bearable, while others had taken a cautious step back, acknowledging their lack of tolerance for Earth's heat. Xylo wasn't sure why, but something about the conversation sparked a feeling deep inside him, a desire to test something, to push himself further in understanding humanity's strength. He wasn't sure why he was compelled to do it, but he had already come to respect the human species, and a strange sense of curiosity had overtaken him. Clara, Xylo said, entering the dining room where the human ambassador was chatting with a few other representatives. I'd like to try more of your food. Clara turned, surprised. Really? You've barely recovered from a chilly incident. Xylo smiled, a wry, almost reluctant grin forming. It wasn't the chili that made me change my mind. It was a lesson I learned from it. I want to understand more. I want to see what else humanity has to offer. Clara considered this for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Well, if you're truly ready, we can start with something a little less explosive. Xylo gave a slight nod. I'm ready. Section 3. Tasting Humanity's Resilience. The following day, Clara arranged a small tasting event for Xylo. This time, there were no shocking dishes like the chili, no sudden heat that could trigger life-threatening reactions. Instead, Clara had selected an array of simple, traditional human dishes, hearty vegetable stews, grilled meats, fresh fruits, and a variety of homemade breads. Xylo hesitated as the first dish was placed before him. It was a vegetable stew, earthy, hearty, and unpretentious. At first glance, it didn't look like much. But as soon as he tasted it, something unexpected happened. The flavors were rich, balanced. There was a depth to the taste that he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't complex, but it was satisfying in a way that he couldn't quite put into words. This is good, Xylo admitted, the word surprising even him. I didn't expect this. It's so simple, but it's full of life. I thought Earth's food was a trivial thing, a basic means of survival. But this is what sustains you. Clara smiled. Food is about more than just survival. It's about connection, community, and culture. It's about sharing what we have, even if it's not much. Each dish tells a story. Xylo looked down at his plate, contemplating her words. The stew, while humble, had nourished him in ways that no Crithian delicacy ever had. It was a reminder of the human way of life, how they took simple ingredients and made them into something meaningful. It wasn't about perfection. It was about purpose. He continued sampling other dishes, tacos, pasta, a simple chicken roast. With each bite, Xylo's understanding grew. Each dish was different, each with its own unique flavor and history, but they all shared one common thread: resilience. The more he tasted, the more he saw how each dish represented humanity's adaptability. Every meal told a story of survival, of trial and error, of triumph over adversity. These weren't just foods. They were artifacts of human ingenuity, born from centuries of learning how to make do with what was available. I think I'm starting to understand, Xylo said slowly, leaning back in his chair. It's not just the food. It's everything. Your culture, your spirit. It's all about surviving and thriving, no matter the circumstances. Clara nodded, her eyes softening. Exactly. We don't rely on being the best. We rely on being able to face whatever comes our way and make the most of it. Xylo sat in silence, deeply moved. The simplicity of it all, how something as basic as food could reveal the depth of humanity's spirit, was awe-inspiring. The Crithians, for all their technology and superiority, had never learned to live this way. They had learned to control, to conquer, but never to truly adapt in the face of challenges as humanity had. Section 4, an invitation to change.